I just finished a study of a painting by Leonardo da Vinci using a technique called Sfumato. Let's take a closer look at the final result. But what is Sfumato? The term sfumato comes from the Italian sfumare, to tone down or to evaporate like smoke. Leonardo da Vinci described sfumato as painting in the way that your shadows and lights be united without strokes or marks in the manner of smoke. Leonardo used this technique in several paintings, including the Mona Lisa, St. John the Baptist, Bacchus, and the Virgin and Child with St. Anne. By the way, this means that Leonardo did not use sfumato in all his paintings. So how was sfumato different from what artists were doing before? Byzantine and Gothic artists emphasized bright colors and gold leaf. They painted in layers, from dark to light, which had theological significance. Michelangelo's unfinished painting, the Manchester Madonna, shows the technique of adding lighter layers over a dark greenish base. In the Renaissance, artists became more interested in the effects of light and shadow. Oil painting became popular, and it made possible a technique called glazing, where transparent layers of paint were used to color or darken. And here is the secret of sfumato. Sfumato uses glazing. It's not just about blending. Scientific papers show sfumato involved glazing dark layers on top of a pink blended color layer. I found another paper that reconstructed Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa and his sfumato technique. This paper used a blended pinkish color layer similar to Leonardo's non-sfumato paintings like Ginevra da Benci. The skin tones were glazed over this pink layer, alternating with layers of white scumbling to re-establish the lights. Finally, the shadows were deepened and softened with dark glazes. We are going to be painting from this paper, but I'm going to add a step. According to my research, Leonardo often used brown and white underpaintings, like in his unfinished painting, La Scapigliata. So I'm going to put a brown and white underpainting underneath the pink layer. Here's the plan. We'll start by toning the surface brown, then we'll add a brown and white layer like in La Scapigliata, then a pink layer like in Ginevra da Benci. On top of this, we will alternate glazing the entire skin, and then scumbling smaller and smaller highlights. Then we will deepen the shadows with dark glazes in smaller and smaller areas to build up the sfumato effect. Now, I know all these layers sound complicated, but don't worry. Before starting the painting, we will do a little exercise where we practice the techniques involved on some spheres. Leonardo was using oil paint, but I'm using acrylic. You can use either oil or acrylic. Both are good for the layering that we will be doing. I like to do practice sheets for any techniques I haven't done before. The top row is practicing the brown underpainting and the pink layer. The bottom row is practicing glazing. Now I'm glazing over the pink layer. Then I am evening out the glaze with another brush. Since I'm working in acrylic, I can use a hairdryer to rapidly dry layers. The next technique is called scumbling or dry brushing. I add some light colored paint to my brush and then wipe most of it out so that I can add a very thin layer. This technique restores the lights and highlights of rounded forms. Hairdryer again. Now we're glazing. Scumbling again. Scumbling. Scumbling some more. Now we're glazing a more reddish hue to correct the color. Now I'm mixing up a darkening glaze. The darkening glazes are the key to sfumato, because we need to build up the shadows. Unlike with the colored glazes, the darkening glazes are only applied to the shadow areas. I found that glazing thinly and then softening the edges gave me the best results. If you try to make a single layer too thick, then you will see unevenness. I know that we're moving fast. We'll go through all of this again in the real painting. What I wanted you to see was how I glazed a series of thin layers and slowly built up changes. Each layer has been difficult to see, but now that we've built up many layers, you can see that the shadows of my sphere have gotten significantly darker than my other pink sphere. This is sfumato in action. To practice sfumato in a painting, I made a study of a different Leonardo piece, the Virgin of the Rocks from the Louvre Museum. I chose to paint a detail of the Virgin's face, but I couldn't find a high-resolution reference, so I had to work with what I could find. I used the Mona Lisa as another reference for sfumato. The Mona Lisa has gone very dark and yellow with age, so I decided to tone that down for my version. Now let's get started. I painted in black outlines to reinforce my pencil drawing. If you prefer, you can do this step after you've toned the surface. Then I added some light shading. I toned the surface burnt umber, which is known as the imprimatura. I used several layers to get a mid-tone value of around 6 on my value checker card. I mixed up a warm, light grayish tone of around a 7.5 for the white underpainting. I didn't use pure white because I don't want intense highlights in this piece. Instead, I mixed a little yellow ochre and burnt umber. I reinforced the darkest accents also. I added some of the hair highlights to make sure that the hair was in the right place. The goal was to get a brown and white underpainting, looking something like La Scapigliata. I am using golden open acrylics, a line of slow-drying acrylics that function more like oils. You can instead use oils like Leonardo or normal acrylics. Acrylics, including slow-drying acrylics, dry faster than oils and have a thinner texture. When doing layered painting, you can get to the same place with both oils and acrylics. The difference is that with oils, you will be doing more blending and less layers, while in acrylic, you will be doing less blending and more layers. Later in the painting, you'll see why I chose acrylics for sfumato. This step is the blended color layer, known as the pink layer in the research papers. I mixed up a series of values with the lightest being around 7.5, which is the lightest that I want to go in this painting. I did not mix all the darker values, because we will be doing dark glazes as part of the sfumato process. According to the research, Leonardo painted the pink layer wet and wet with blending. I believe that he actually used multiple layers to get the level of finish in Ginevra da Vinci. I use multiple layers because even slow-drying acrylic dries quickly, limiting the time that you have for wet and wet painting. I use the second layer to smooth out transitions in certain areas. My pink layer ended up very grayish or beige, because Ginevra da Vinci, my reference, is very grayish. You can make your pink layer a little pinker if you want. Just err on the side of too little color rather than too much. This current step is about establishing values, and we will be able to correct colors during the glazing, which is coming up next. I mixed several glazes, a yellowish-orange glaze, a reddish-orange glaze, a burnt umber glaze, and a burnt umber glaze with black. The glaze should be so thin that it's nearly invisible. Picking out some dust with the smaller brush. It's better if you can dust the surface first and avoid having to do this. I'm using the fan brush to smooth out the glaze to get rid of ridges and streaks. Later in the painting, I stopped using the fan brush for the smoothing because I found that it got full of medium and the bristles clumped together. Instead, I did the smoothing using the same large brush that I used for the glazing. I dry this layer with a hairdryer because I'm working in acrylic. I can move right on to the next layer. If you're working in oils, you need to let this layer dry completely. I switched to a thinner medium for the glazing to make it spread better. I painted a second glazing layer with my brush strokes going at a different angle. It's definitely looking warmer when compared to the previous step. For the Scumbling layer, I mixed up a light skin tone with a value of around 7.5, the lightest that I want to go. Then I wiped out most of the paint from my brush. That's why this technique is sometimes called dry brushing. Scumbling is applied to the highlights. I used additional brushes without paint to soften the edges of the scumbling as described in the paper. I made a double layer for the lightest highlights. Then I established the reflected light, but I made it very subtle. Reflected light is easily overdone. Now we have highlights again, but the painting is looking whitish, so we need to glaze more color back in. Oops, I was glazing off camera and the scumbling layer underneath wasn't dry enough, causing white streaks. I wiped them off. This is why you have to let every layer dry. Then I proceeded with glazing several layers. Back to scumbling. Glazing reddish tones for the cheeks and lips. Off camera, I added 2 more layers of orangey glazes. And now the part you've been waiting for. The dark glazes where we develop the Sfumato effect. I mixed up 2 shadow glazes with burnt umber and black, one warmer and one cooler. Then I wiped most of the paint out of the brush. I am using this dark glaze only in the shadow areas, unlike the previous glazes which covered all the flesh. I used the blow dryer and moved on to the next layer. I softened the edge of the face with glazes. Remember, in Sfumato, we want to soften all hard edges. When I'm painting, the layers are very thin, so it's hard to see exactly what I'm doing. Let's review the technique by practicing on a scrap piece of paper. The key to Sfumato glazing is to soften the edges of the glaze. Leonardo used all sorts of techniques to soften the paint, but the research paper recommended a second brush as the best. I mixed up a stronger dark glaze for the dark accents in the features, and I softened any lines. I decided to darken everything a little bit with 4 layers of burnt umber and yellow ochre on the entire face. Now we've come to the end of the glazing. Let's review what's changed. We started with the grayish pink layer, then colored glazes and scumbling, then darkening glazes. Before and after the darkening glazes. Notice how much the eye has been softened by Sfumato. For the clothing and hair, I'm going to show some quick highlights of the process. The clothing started as a gray underpainting. Then I made a blue opaque blended layer off camera. I glazed a little bit of ultramarine blue on top. And then I used a black glaze to soften and darken the shadows with Sfumato. The hair was painted opaquely from dark to light. Then I put a dark glaze on the shadow side of the head for Sfumato. And now we're done. According to my notes, there were around 30 layers of glazes and scumbles. Thanks to using acrylics, I could quickly dry these layers with a hairdryer and lay down multiple layers in a session. With these thin layers, you can develop the painting according to your taste. Want punchier highlights? Do some more scumbles. Want a different hue for the skin tones? Use a different color glaze. Want deeper sfumato like in the Mona Lisa? Then do more shadow glazes. I glazed 30 layers, but Leonardo da Vinci spent 4 years working on the Mona Lisa. This has been my first YouTube video. If you got something out of it, please like, subscribe, and comment to send me the message to make more videos. Thank you for watching.